Adoptive daughter was about to get married to her childhood sweetheart, but didn't want us present there because her bio family would be in attendance and she didn't want our presence to make them feel guilty. We respected her wishes, but on the morning of the wedding, we get a call from her in tears because she's in big trouble because this happened and now only our attendants will resume her wedding. But we inform her it's too late for her to receive our blessings now. I, 52, female, and my husband, 54, male, adopted our daughter, Bessie, when she was 7. She's now 26 and this situation has left both of us completely heartbroken. I've been a long-time lurker but never thought I'd be posting here. This might be long, so please bear with me. Our daughter came to us through the foster system. Her biological parents had severe substance abuse issues and she had been bouncing between foster homes for 2 years before we met her. The moment we saw her, we knew she was meant to be our daughter. She was this quiet, artistic little girl who loved drawing butterflies on everything she could find. The adoption process wasn't easy, but we finally made it official when she was 9. We did everything we could to give Bessie a loving, stable home. From the moment she was little, we supported her interests like her love of art and drawing. We also made sure she got the help she needed to work through the difficult experiences from her early childhood. We found a great therapist who specialized in childhood trauma and Bessie went to regular sessions for several years. It wasn't always easy. There were some tough moments, but we made sure she knew that she was safe and loved with us. We also always maintained an open conversation about her adoption. We wanted her to know that she could ask us anything. When she had questions about her biological parents, we answered them as honestly and lovingly as we could. We never spoke badly of her biological parents. It wasn't our place to do that, and we believed it was important for Bessie to understand that they loved her in their own way. We would tell her that they struggled with substance abuse and weren't able to care for her the way she needed, but it didn't mean they didn't care about her. We always tried to approach it gently so she wouldn't carry unnecessary anger or hurt about her past. As she grew older, Bessie naturally became more curious about her biological family. When she turned 18, she expressed a desire to find them. We fully supported her decision even though part of me worried about how it might affect her. We helped her through the process of finding them and eventually she reconnected with her biological parents. The reunion, however, was anything but smooth at first. It was exciting for Bessie. Her biological parents had gotten clean and seemed to be in a better place. They had 2 younger children after her and they expressed deep regret about having given her up. They wanted to be a part of her life again. Bessie was thrilled at the idea of having not just parents but siblings too. We encouraged her to build those relationships but reminded her to be careful and not rush into things too quickly. But things didn't stay easy for long. After a while, her biological parents started showing some of the same old patterns of behavior. There were times when they would suddenly disappear from her life for months with no explanation. Bessie would try to contact them only to be met with silence. She'd be left feeling confused, hurt and abandoned all over again. When they would finally reappear, they'd apologize and say they'd been going through a hard time, but they were better now. It was always the same story. Things would be okay for a while and then they'd disappear again. Bessie struggled with these ups and downs. She wanted to believe in the idea of a family reunion and kept hoping things would get better with them. Each time they left, she felt heartbroken, but each time they came back, she gave them another chance. It was a cycle of hope and disappointment. Throughout all of this, my husband and I were there to support her. We listened to her when she was upset, reassured her that none of it was her fault, and reminded her that she always had a stable, loving home with us. There were times when I wanted to protect her more, step in and tell her to keep her distance from them for her own good, but I knew that wasn't my place. Bessie had to navigate this relationship on her own terms and all we could do was be there for her when things got tough. It wasn't easy, but we made sure she knew that no matter what happened with her biological parents, we were her family and loved her unconditionally. Bessie met Jake in high school and from the moment they started dating it was clear that they had something special. They stayed together through college, growing even closer, and when Jake proposed last year, we couldn't have been happier. He was a wonderful partner for Bessie, kind, supportive, and steady. His family was equally amazing, welcoming Bessie with open arms and treating her like one of their own. Seeing her so happy with Jake and embraced by his family was a relief to us. We felt like she had found the love and stability she deserved. When the wedding planning started, everything seemed to be going well. Bessie and Jake were excited and we were ready to help in any way we could. We were eager to be involved not just financially but emotionally. After all, this was a milestone moment in our daughter's life and we wanted to be part of it every step of the way. But as the planning continued, something changed. Bessie started pulling away, becoming more distant from us. At first, we thought it was just the stress of planning a wedding. Weddings are notoriously overwhelming and we figured she was feeling the pressure. We didn't push her, thinking she just needed some space to manage everything. However, as time went on the distance grew and it became clear that there was more going on than just wedding stress. The closeness we had always shared started to feel strained. It wasn't until she sat us down for a difficult conversation that we realized what was really happening. Bessie, with clear discomfort and hesitation, explained that while she wanted us to be part of her wedding, her biological parents would also be attending and she was worried about how they would feel. She said that seeing us, the parents who had raised her, might make her biological parents feel guilty or uncomfortable. In her mind, it was better if we didn't attend the ceremony at all. Hearing those words was like a punch to the gut. We were absolutely devastated for years. We had been there for Bessie through every up and down in her life, and now we were being asked to step aside on the most important day of her life. It wasn't just that we wouldn't be there to watch her say her vows or walk her down the aisle. It was the feeling of being sidelined, of being less important than the people who had failed her in the past. It hurt deeply, more than I can even explain. Still, as painful as it was, we told her we understood. We told her we respected her wishes and would do whatever made her feel comfortable. We didn't want to add to the stress of her wedding day. We were heartbroken, but we wanted her to have the perfect day, even if it meant sacrificing our own feelings. What made it harder was the fact that we had already contributed so much to the wedding. We had paid for about 60% of the total expenses, which amounted to roughly $35,000, but it wasn't about the money, it was about the emotional investment we had made. Our hopes and dreams of seeing her walk down the aisle, of sharing in that once-in-a-lifetime moment, to be excluded after everything we had done felt like a betrayal. In the same conversation we even offered to bow out of the reception too, if that would make things easier for her. We didn't want to cause any tension or awkwardness, but she insisted that we come to the reception, reassuring us that she still wanted us there for the celebration, just not for the ceremony itself. So we agreed, though it felt bittersweet. We would be there, but not in the way we had always imagined. The weight of that decision stayed with us for a long time, leaving a wound that would take time to heal. The real pain came with the realization that she was prioritizing her biological parents, people who had let her down during the most critical years of her life, over us. We had poured everything into raising her: love, stability, and a safe home where she could heal and thrive. Yet despite all of that, it felt like we were being pushed aside to accommodate her biological parents, who were now being given a second chance at playing a role in her life. It was incredibly hard to accept. Still, we didn't want to make things harder for her. Instead of expressing our hurt directly, we quietly sent her a heartfelt letter letting her know we loved her and would see her at the reception as she had requested. The morning of the wedding around 6 a.m., I received a hysterical call from Bessie. Through her tears, she explained that her biological parents had gotten into a huge fight at the rehearsal dinner the night before. Her bio father had relapsed months ago, but had hidden it well. He showed up drunk to the dinner and accused his wife of ruining their family years ago by not trying harder to get clean sooner. It escalated into a massive scene, with both of them bringing up old wounds and traumatizing everyone present. Her bio father even stormed out, knocking over tables and breaking glasses, while her mother broke down in front of everyone, sobbing uncontrollably. Bessie had spent most of the night trying to smooth things over, but it was clear that her bio parents were in no condition to attend the wedding. That morning, both of them called Bessie separately to say they couldn't attend the wedding. Her bio siblings also backed out, saying they needed to deal with their parents' crisis. Bessie was crying, saying the wedding would be ruined because she had planned everything around her reunited family narrative. She had even arranged for her bio father to walk her down the aisle alongside her bio mother doing a special reading. Now with them gone, she felt her entire vision for the day was falling apart. She begged us to step in, wanted my husband to walk her down the aisle, and asked if I would do the reading instead. She said she realized she had made a horrible mistake and that we were her real parents all along. While my heart ached for her pain, I had to be honest. I told her that while we loved her deeply, we couldn't just be her backup plan. We had already canceled our formal attire rentals and made other plans for the day to cope with our exclusion. More importantly, the hurt of being sidelined for months only to be called in as last-minute replacements was too deep. The wedding ended up being postponed. Bessie was too distraught to go through with it, and Jake, bless him, supported her decision. Several guests had already arrived from out of town, so they turned the reception into a regular party, which we did attend as previously planned. It was awkward and tense, with many guests whispering about what had happened. At the reception, I overheard conversations between Jake's family and our extended relatives. His family, who knew about Bessie's troubled reunion with her biological parents, were visibly upset for us. They had seen how much we had done for Bessie over the years, and many couldn't understand why we were excluded from the ceremony in the first place. Jake's mother even pulled me aside to apologize on Bessie's behalf, though she had no reason to. During the reception, Bessie was distant, overwhelmed by the chaos of the last few days. She avoided us for most of the night, and at one point we saw her sitting alone, staring off into space while everyone around her danced and celebrated. Jake spent most of the time by her side, but there was clear tension between them. It was heartbreaking to see her like that. but there was nothing more we could do. We left the reception early, quietly slipping out when it was clear that the night wouldn't bring any closure. I'm writing this 3 days later because I'm still struggling with our decision. My sister thinks we were too harsh and should have stepped up for our daughter regardless of our hurt feelings. My husband stands firm that we did the right thing by maintaining our dignity and teaching Bessie that actions have consequences. I'm torn between the maternal instinct to protect my child from pain and the need to stand up for ourselves as parents who have given everything, only to be treated as the B team. Was I wrong? Should we have just swallowed our pride and stepped in? I can't stop thinking about her crying on the phone that morning. Update 1. A few days after the wedding, Bessie called us again. It wasn't like the frantic call on the morning of her wedding day. This time there was no hysteria or tears, just a deep, almost eerie sense of regret in her voice. I could feel the weight of her words as she told us that she had decided to postpone the wedding indefinitely. She and Jake were still together, thankfully, but she admitted that things had become too chaotic for her to continue with the wedding plans. Her biological parents were now in even deeper turmoil after the rehearsal dinner disaster, and she needed time to sort things out. She didn't go into detail, but I gathered that the aftermath of the rehearsal dinner had hit her bio family hard. Her father had disappeared after the argument. No one had heard from him for days. Her bio mother, who had already been on shaky ground with sobriety, was apparently back in some kind of spiral, and Nessa's younger siblings were furious with her for forcing them into a situation where they had to confront their parents' toxicity head-on. From what she said, they had all but cut her off, blaming her for the wedding fiasco and the ensuing family breakdown. In her quiet, remorseful tone, Bessie admitted that she had been trying too hard to create this perfect reunion narrative with her biological family. She had wanted so desperately to believe that everything could be mended, that by having her bio parents at the wedding walking her down the aisle and playing a central role, she could erase all the pain and dysfunction of her childhood. She was trying to heal wounds that were far too deep in a way that was superficial and at our expense. In doing so, she realized she had pushed away the people who had been there for her all along. While I appreciated her honesty and the fact that she had come to this realization on her own, the conversation was still difficult. Hearing her apologize felt bittersweet. On one hand, I could tell she was genuinely remorseful for how things have played out. She said she never intended to hurt us, but in her mind she was always trying to balance the two worlds, the life she had with us and the life she felt she was supposed to have had with her biological family. But her apology, while sincere, didn't erase the hurt we felt. There was no undoing what had happened. She went on to explain that after postponing the wedding, she and Jake had gotten into several long, difficult conversations. Jake was hurt too, not by the postponement but by the fact that Bessie had put so much emphasis on pleasing her bio family to the point where it became the core of their wedding day. He felt like he had been sidelined in his own wedding room, and while he still loved her deeply, there were wounds between them now that would take time to heal. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about how Bessie had allowed her bio parents to play such a dominant role in her life, even when they weren't capable of supporting her the way she wanted them to. During the call, Bessie asked if we could meet in person to talk things through. She said she wanted to make things right, to repair our relationship and find a way to move forward. But as much as I appreciated the gesture, I wasn't ready. I told her, as gently as I could, that we needed some time to process everything. After all, it had only been a few days since the wedding and the emotional wounds were still fresh. We hadn't even had the chance to fully unpack our feelings, let alone have a face-to-face conversation about them. Setting boundaries in that moment was one of the hardest things I've had to do. As a mother, my instinct was to rush to her side, to comfort her and tell her that everything would be okay, but I knew that doing so would mean sweeping all of the hurt under the rug. We had been treated like an afterthought, and while I could understand her motivations, it didn't change the fact that our feelings were valid. My husband and I needed time to work through our own pain, and we couldn't do that if we immediately jumped into reconciliation without first allowing ourselves to heal. The conversation ended with her saying she understood and that she would give us the space we needed, but there was a sadness in her voice that I couldn't shake. I knew she was struggling, not just with us but with everything. Her biological family was crumbling, her wedding was on indefinite hold, and now she was dealing with the reality of how her choices had affected the people she loved most. I couldn't help but feel for her, but I also couldn't ignore the fact that we were hurting too. After the call, my husband and I sat in silence for a while. He didn't say much, but I could tell that he was processing everything just like I was. It wasn't just about Bessie's apology, it was about the bigger picture. This wasn't the first time we had been caught in the crossfire of her attempts to navigate her relationship with her biological family. Over the years, there had been smaller incidents, missed holidays, last-minute cancellations, moments where we felt like we were playing second fiddle to the people who had given her up. But this was on a whole other level, and the worst part was that we had let it happen. We had allowed ourselves to be sidelined for the sake of her happiness. And now, We were left wondering if we had been too passive all along. In the days that followed, there were more revelations. My sister, who had been supportive throughout the whole ordeal, told me that she had spoken to a few mutual friends who had attended the wedding reception. Apparently many of them had noticed how tense things were between Bessie and Jake, and there were whispers about whether or not they would even go through with the wedding at all. Some people were questioning Bessie's decision to put so much stock in her biological parents, and there was a lot of sympathy directed towards us. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. On one hand, it was nice to know that people understood our pain. But on the other hand, I hated that this had become a topic of conversation among our friends and family. One thing that stuck out to me was when my sister mentioned that Jake's parents had pulled her aside at the reception to express their concern. They were worried about the toll all of this was taking on Jake, and while they loved Bessie, they weren't sure if their son could handle the emotional roller coaster she was going through with her biological family. They were supportive, of course, but there was a subtle undertone of doubt in their words, doubt about whether or not this relationship could withstand the strain that had been placed on it. The days that followed were quiet. Bessie didn't call again. We didn't reach out. It was an unspoken agreement that we all needed time to heal, time to reflect, and time to decide what the future would look like. My husband and I spent a lot of time talking about how we wanted to move forward, not just with Bessie but with our own lives. We had given so much of ourselves to her over the years, and while we didn't regret a single moment of it, we realized that we needed to start prioritizing our own well-being too. It was a hard truth to swallow, but it was necessary. Update 2. About a week after our last conversation, Bessie asked to meet us for lunch. I wasn't sure what to expect and I felt nervous. I kept going back and forth in my mind, wanting to fix things but also remembering how much her actions had hurt us. My husband, though quieter about his feelings, was also struggling. We loved her, but there was no denying the pain we had felt since the wedding mess. When we finally sat down for lunch, Bessie seemed more composed, though it was clear the whole situation was still weighing heavily on her. She gave us a hug and for a moment things felt almost normal again. But the tension was still there and soon we got into a long emotional conversation. Bessie explained how overwhelmed she had been trying to keep both her biological family and us happy. She had been stuck in the middle, constantly trying to balance two parts of her life that didn't fit together. In trying to create this perfect image of a reunited family, she'd lost sight of what was really important. She admitted she'd been wrong to push us aside and focus so much on her biological family, especially when they weren't able to be the people she needed them to be. Her biological father had relapsed. Her mother was struggling with sobriety and now both of them were in rehab. Her younger siblings were angry and weren't speaking to her. They blamed her for involving them in the wedding drama and for dragging them into a situation they hadn't been prepared for. Bessie was heartbroken over it all, and the weight of her choices was clear on her face. I listened, feeling conflicted. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. After all, she was our daughter and seeing her in pain was hard. But another part of me couldn't forget how she had treated us. We had been pushed aside only to be called in at the last minute. When her plans with her biological family fell apart, it was hard to forgive that so easily. My husband and I told her how much her choices had hurt us. It wasn't just about the wedding, it was about all the years we had supported her, only to be set aside for people who hadn't been there for her. We had always encouraged her to connect with her biological family, but being excluded from the wedding ceremony, the event we had helped pay for, was deeply painful. Bessie didn't try to defend her actions. She didn't make excuses. Instead, she simply admitted that she had made a mistake. She had been so focused on this idea of a perfect family reunion that she hadn't considered what it would cost her or us. She realized now that she had put the wrong people first and it had blown up in her face. It was a relief to hear her acknowledge her mistakes, but it didn't erase the hurt. We told her that while we loved her, trust had been damaged and it would take time to rebuild. She understood and she didn't push for immediate forgiveness. She said she knew it wouldn't be easy, but she wanted to work on repairing our relationship. During the conversation, Bessie also talked about her relationship with Jake. While they were still together, things between them hadn't been the same since the wedding disaster. Jake had been hurt by how much she had focused on her biological family during the wedding planning and he felt left out. He had supported her through everything, but now there was tension between them. She didn't go into much detail, but it was clear that their relationship was under strain. We left the lunch with a tentative plan to meet again soon, but things felt delicate. It wasn't like before, when we could just move on after a disagreement. This time the hurt ran too deep. We all wanted to move forward, but it was clear that healing would take time. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. Part of me felt hopeful that Bessie was finally seeing things clearly. She seemed genuinely sorry and I wanted to believe that we could fix things. But another part of me wasn't so sure. The pain of being pushed aside for her biological family was still fresh in my mind and I couldn't shake the feeling that things might never fully go back to the way they were. For the next few days, Bessie kept in touch with us. She sent texts and calls to check in, apologizing again and thanking us for meeting with her. I appreciated her efforts, but I still felt guarded. It would take more than a few apologies to rebuild what had been broken. As for her relationship with Jake, we didn't hear much more after the lunch, but I sensed that things were still uncertain between them. The wedding had been postponed indefinitely, and while they were still together, I wasn't sure how long that would last. It was hard to say whether they would make it through this or if the strain of everything would eventually push them apart. Update 3. Hi, guys. It's been a few weeks since that lunch, and while things are improving, it's been a slow and careful process. Bessie and Jake have decided to move forward with a much smaller, more intimate wedding, one that includes only close friends and immediate family. This time, Bessie has made sure we are involved in every step of the planning. She's been much more communicative, sharing details about the dress, the venue, and even asking for my input on little things like flowers and decorations. It's clear she's trying to make up for what happened before, but things still don't feel quite the same. The trust that was broken doesn't just rebuild overnight. My husband and I are still cautious. We've forgiven her in the sense that we're no longer holding on to anger, but there's this invisible boundary now, something that wasn't there before. It's hard to explain, but it's as if we're walking on eggshells with each other, trying to find a new rhythm after everything that's happened. I think Bessie feels it too, though she doesn't say it outright. Her relationship with her biological parents, from what we can gather, remains complicated. Her father is still in rehab, and her mother, while sober, is focusing on her own recovery and her relationship with Bessie's younger siblings. Bessie has kept her distance from them, focusing more on her future with Jake and trying to repair things with us. I don't know if her biological family will be involved in this smaller wedding, and frankly, I haven't asked. It's not my place to interfere in that part of her life, though I do hope she's learned that it's okay to set boundaries with them, just as we've had to set boundaries with her. Jake has been a steady presence through all of this. He stood by Bessie's side, supporting her even when things were at their worst. We've had a few conversations with him, and it's clear he cares deeply for her, but I can tell he's also been affected by everything that's happened. He seems more guarded now too, but I suppose that's to be expected. After all, they were supposed to get married weeks ago, and that dream was shattered because of the decisions Bessie made. They're working through it though, and I respect how they've handled things as a couple. They seem more grounded now, more focused on what really matters, and I think that's a good sign for their future together. As for us, we're doing our best to move forward. My husband has been my rock through all of this, quietly supportive but also firm in his belief that we need to protect ourselves emotionally. He's made it clear that while we love Bessie and are here for her, we're not going to allow ourselves to be hurt like that again, and I agree. I spent a lot of time thinking about boundaries, about what's healthy and what isn't. The relationship we had before, the one where we were always ready to jump in and fix everything no matter the cost to ourselves, doesn't work anymore. We need to approach things differently now with a bit more distance, and that's okay. I can't say we've fully forgiven her, at least not in the sense that everything's back to how it was before, but we're learning to let go of the resentment and hurt because holding on to it doesn't help anyone, least of all us. What good would it do to stay angry? We're still her parents and she's still our daughter. That bond doesn't disappear just because things get complicated. But it's clear that moving forward, we need to protect ourselves and make sure our needs are respected too. There's hope though. Bessie has shown that she's willing to put in the work to fix things, and that means a lot. She's made mistakes, but haven't we all? I can see the effort she's putting in and I appreciate it. It doesn't erase the past, but it does give me hope for the future. I'm cautiously optimistic that with